Let's talk more about the race for president and what we just heard from Democratic frontrunner Joe Biden. In front of voters in South Carolina, Biden apologized for remarks he made about segregationist senators. He took responsibility for the controversial 1994 crime bill, and he said he's a changed person.
America in 2019 is a very, very different place than the 1970s. And that's a good thing. I've witnessed an incredible amount of change in this nation. And I've worked to make that change happen. And yes, I've changed also. I'm not the same person who entered the Senate at age 29. I don't pretend to have gotten everything right. I don't pretend that none of my positions have changed. I've grown, and I think it's good to be able to grow, to progress.
Joining us now, Harvard law professor Cornel West. He's a surrogate for Senator Bernie Sanders. First, I just want to get your reaction to what we're hearing from Biden today, talking about race, including an apology.
You know, my dear sister Anna, it just strikes me as the typical behavior of the establishment politician. He's now regretted what he said. He now apologizes 2 weeks later. Two weeks ago, he said he wouldn't apologize. You say, oh, well, I see. You check the polls and find out where you really stand. He's changed a lot in 2 weeks, not just changed a lot in 40 years. He's also eulogized Strom Thurmond and talked about his truth and his genius. We can go on and on and on. This is a matter of the record. He has a contextual ethics. My dear brother Bernie Sanders has a consistent ethics. At the very moment in which he's working, Biden's working with Jesse Helms on this amendment to make sure there's no state-sponsored busing to desegregate schools, Bernie Sanders is getting arrested with Martin King and the others fighting for not just integration, but for busing as well. So the problem is that you and I know, we live in the political age of Bernie Sanders. Everybody's got to talk about medical care for all. Everybody's got to talk about $15 for a living wage. Everybody's got to talk about what are you going to do with student debt. Bernie wants to eliminate it. We've come now to the context in which Bernie Sanders is setting the tone and the terms of the debate. It's just a matter now of acknowledging the establishment in the Democratic Party is unraveling. That's what we're witnessing. That's what we're seeing.
And your skepticism of Joe Biden's apology and the comments we heard from him today. Do you believe he's a racist?
Oh, no. I don't think he's a racist in terms of having any kind of ill intent or malicious orientation. But I've said before, I think white supremacy, like male supremacy, like anti-Jewish, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian, any elements are shot through us. I've got white supremacy inside of me. Does that make me a racist? No, I try to conquer it every day. Does Brother Biden have white supremacy inside of him? Yes, he does, but he fights it every day, too. It's not a matter of being pure pristine when we talk about racism in this regard. The question is, do you allow it to triumph? Do you allow it to overflow? Now, Brother Trump, he's relatively unsuccessful in this regard when it comes to xenophobia, women, blacks, Mexicans, Muslims, and so forth. But as human beings, we all are wrestling with this on the inside. But most importantly, when you look at the Bernie Sanders campaign, what do you see? Major contributors, Walmart workers, major contributors, teachers, Biden, Harris, Buttigieg, major contributors, elites, those at the top. It's a very different orientation. We are witnessing the awakening of poor and working people of all colors coming together in solidarity to save this democracy, given the political pathology at work in the White House.
Let me ask you about Senator Kamala Harris and some comments and plans she put forward today. She is proposing a $100 billion plan to help African-American homeowners. It would provide grants of up to $25,000 to help cover down payments and closing costs for homeowners in redline communities. It would better enforce anti-discrimination laws. It would increase funding for a program that helps first-time home buyers. Her goal is to close the U.S. racial wealth gap. Is this something you want to see Sanders get behind, or does he have a better first step?
No, I think he actually has a much better first step, because you're going to have to come to terms with the grotesque wealth inequality. You're going to have to come to terms with Wall Street greed. You're going to have to come to terms with the 1% owning 90% of the wealth and 3 individuals owning 50% of the 3 individuals having wealth equivalent to the 50% population. in the United States. So that we welcome, you know, Senator and Sister Harris's movement in this regard. But even Sister Harris, we have to be very honest about this. You know, when you're criminalizing parents whose children are truant, when you're opting for prisoners remaining incarcerated rather than release because you want to use them for cheap labor. This is when she's top cop. This is when she's prosecutor in California. You can't come along lately and sound progressive. You got to be consistently progressive, the way Brother Bernie Sanders has been for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. This is not just a circus for progressive gestures. This is a life lived and a politics connected to bearing witness.
I hear you, and no one can take away from what Bernie Sanders and his movement has already accomplished. I mean, we see what happened in 2016, and it's clear in 2019 that he's opened the door to the progressive wing of the party.
That's right.
But when you look at polling after the first debate, and even before that first debate, he's been declining. While rivals like Harris, like Senator Elizabeth Warren, who also has adopted a number of Sanders' policies and has plans to reach some of that, bridge the gap that we've talked about when it comes to income inequality, racial injustices. They're rising in the polls. If the ultimate goal is to beat Donald Trump, could Sanders have more influence rallying his supporters to get behind another candidate?
Well, I mean, it's just not clear whether any centrist candidate like Biden or any centrist candidate who acts progressive like Harris has a chance of beating Trump. I'm not convinced that they do. I think you have to have a progressive candidate who can generate not just division, energy, and enthusiasm, but actually be a genuine progressive. And the center is collapsing. We've got right-wing populism. We've got left-wing populism. Who represents left-wing populism in its deepest form? Bernie Sanders. And it's not even socialism. People talk about it, but it's really left-wing populism. But it's an acknowledgement of the dignity and preciousness of poor and working people, no matter what color they are. And so in that regard, I'm not too worried about the polls. I'm not too worried about the Sanders campaign. We are marathoners. We're not worried about the up and down, the flash in the pan, the gesture at a particular debate. We're talking about mobilizing on the ground millions of people, bringing power and pressure to bear in a democratic way so that we can transform this country. As you notice, the earth has been doing some shaking and quaking around here. I got caught in the LA airport where things were moving back and forth. Well, you know, the Sanders campaign is a justice train. It's a love train. We want to create an earthquake vis-a-vis the establishments that unleashes the magnificent potential of those Sly Stone call everyday people.
I think you're a poet and you didn't even know it. Dr. Cornel West, thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you. I salute you, my dear sister.
All right, appreciate that. We'll have much more.